All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class, I've been going through a series of video presentations I've created based on the Mozilla Developer Network's Learn Web Development series. And I am in the CSS part, which is about the third module, and I'm about halfway through it, or getting to be halfway through it. We're talking CSS building blocks, and this is on backgrounds, borders. Some of the information that's in there we've already gone over. Some of it will be brand new. So as they mentioned, in this lesson, we will take a look at some of the creative things that you can do with CSS backgrounds and borders. Things like adding gradients, background images, rounded corners, etc. So the CSS background property is a shorthand for a number of things that you can put in. So in other words, these could have been put in individually, but usually they're combined. All right. It says we'll return to how the shorthand works later, but let's take a look at some of the different stuff. Well, you know what? We've already worked with background color. And remember, when you use background color, you can either use background color or just the word background. Either one of them will work. And virtually anything that's in a box can have a background color if you want it to have one. Now, sometimes it's going to show very little to not at all, and sometimes that's almost all you'll see, if not all you'll see. So in the example here, what do we have? Well, we've got a background color for this, we've got a background color for this, and we've got a background color for this. All right. Not only can you put in a background color, but you may decide that you want to use a background image. Now, there's something very important about background images. Background images can be easier to work with. Stop this for a second. All right, then, continuing on, we're talking about background images. And it says the background image property enables the display of an image in the background. This can look, depending on how it's set up, can be much more professional looking than just putting an image out there. Setting it up as a background image can end up looking a lot nicer. All right, we're going to get into all that stuff as we go in and start actually building our own website. So it says the example that's shown here demonstrates two things about background images. By default, the image is not scaled down to fit in the box. All right, so we only see some of it, whereas the small image is tiled to fill the box. All right. It says in this case, the actual image is just 1 star, but we've told it to take and fill up as much of the area as it possibly could. If you specify a background color in addition to a background image, as mentioned here, then the image displays on top of the color. All right, and what that means is if you've got any area that's not being covered by the image, it'll be covered by the background color. Okay. All right, the background repeat, as it says right there, with background repeat, if you've got no repeat, it'll put it in there only once. Make sense? Repeat X will repeat it along the x-axis. Repeat Y will repeat it, I'm sorry, the x-axis is here. Repeat Y will repeat, so repeat X will repeat it horizontally. Repeat Y will repeat it vertically, and repeat will do both. So that's kind of what you have here, is the repeat. Sizing the background image, as it says in the example above, we've got a large image that has ended up being cropped as it is larger than the element that it is a background of. So we could use the background size property to take up either a length or a percentage. Or you can use the keywords like cover, and as it says right there, the browser will make the image just large enough to completely cover the box area that it's in while it maintains its aspect ratio, or contain, which will make the image the right size to fit inside of the box. You may end up, as it says there, with gaps on either side if the aspect ratio is different. So it's a lot of this. It's not going to make sense to read about it. It's going to make more sense to do it. So as mentioned here in the example below, the author says, I've used a larger image and used length units to size it inside of the box. Well, you can see how skewed it ends up looking in here. Not very nice. All right. So it says, try doing the following. Change the length units to modify the size of the background. Remove the length units to see what happens. If the image is smaller than the box, change the repeat. All right, so there's a lot of different things that you can do with this, in other words. All right, now you may or may not be aware of this, but let's see, if I'm going to write in here, let's see, how about this? I'm going to put it here, X and Y axis. How about we'll say graph? Okay, well, if you were working back in the days of high school or whatever, and junior high, whatever, and this right here was your y-axis, and this was your x-axis, this point right here where they intersect was called the origin. That was point 0, 0. The reason I'm mentioning that to you is when you were working on a web page, 0, 0 is the upper left-hand corner. So as you move farther on the x-axis, it's going in a positive direction, and in the y-axis there, it's going actually in a negative direction. There's y in a positive direction, and there's x in a negative direction. But the default position is going to be 0, 0, to put it right there. But you can use different words, as it says. You can use words like top and right. But again, much of the time, this is only going to make sense when you start physically positioning things around, not reading things like we're talking about here. So there they did a no repeat, meaning it'll only show once, but by default it would put it right here. But they positioned it 120 pixels over and 1em, which is about 16 pixels down. Now, next here, when you do a gradient, what happens when you do a gradient is you're typically going from one color to another. Now here you're going from a light blue to almost a black, and you can do it in different ways. You can go from right to left, left to right, top to bottom. You can go sideways. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but it's mentioned there when a gradient is used for the background, it acts just like an image. All right, there is an MDN page for the gradient type, so you can take a look at it. It says a fun way to play with gradients is to use one of the many CSS gradient generators available on the web, such as this one. So if we look, there you go. And you can see here, so we can change colors. So notice now we're going to reds and greens, etc. So I go here to a purple, and I can say how I want this to change. All right. There's a lot of different, this is just an automated type of tool that you can use. Okay. It says try some different gradients in the example below. In the two boxes, we have a linear gradient that is stretched over the whole box and a radial gradient that repeats. And again, most of the time this stuff is done for effect. It is also possible to have multiple background images. Gradients can be mixed with background images. All right. So what does that have to do with this one here? Well, there's actually two different images here. There's the small star and there's the larger star. And they've set them up so that basically each of the small stars, I should say each of the large stars is surrounded by 4 small stars. Okay. All right. Another option is mentioned there that you have available is to specify how things are going to scroll. And why is that important? Well, for example, not so much today, but it used to be, at least when a lot of the web and a lot of the stuff that you saw in there was much more textual in nature. What you would have was people would have like a watermark that they would put on things, like on documents and stuff. And sometimes you still see those on images and the like. All right. But with these background attachments, you might have wanted it set up so that that didn't scroll. So even if you scrolled an image or whatever, that watermark would always stay right there, type of thing. You often see stuff like that. These backgrounds have short properties where you can combine things together, and they show an example right here. Okay. Accessibility considerations for backgrounds. Well, again, just remember when you're using this different stuff. It says when you place text on top of a background image or color, make sure you've got enough contrast. Again, we talked before about the fact that you're going to have many people who are going to be, probably 5 to 10% of people in this world are colorblind. And if you don't do a good enough job of making a difference between the background and what's going to go in the background, they're going to have a hard time discerning what exactly where one starts and one ends. All right, borders. It says when we learned about the box model, we discovered how borders affect the size of the box. Here in this lesson, it says we talk about how to use borders creatively. Well, the big thing is when you're using them, we talked about this before. Remember, border itself will draw technically 4 borders: a border top, a border right, a border bottom, and a border left. But you can decide to use 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those pieces, or of course 0 pieces. All right, for different effects. All right. When you are creating things and you use a border radius and you give it an amount, what you're doing is you're rounding the corners. All right. And so for example, this box right here, if you wanted that box to be a round box, which kind of sounds strange, but if you wanted that, you probably could stick border radius at 50%, and then it would be round. So in here, notice border top right radius. So that's just this one that we've changed. All right. And you can see the rounded effects that you can get. So we've got 3 of them set the same and 1 of them is set differently. Quite often people will do things like that with buttons. You might want a rounded effect because it looks a little bit more professional. Now, again, there's a test your skills. If you get a chance, please take a look through it. And as they mentioned, we've covered a lot here, and there's still a lot more to talk about. In the next lesson, it says we'll talk about how writing mode interacts with your CSS. So the next part of this will be on handling different text directions. Now, this is probably going to be a fairly short lecture when we get to this, because again, unless you're doing something more on an international realm, we're going to be talking about doing things left to right and top to bottom. But I'll be back with that anyway in a couple minutes.